to do. Number two, we consider this to be Kenya's last best chance. The youth have given our country our last best chance. We either seize it and swim with it by implementing all their demands, or we ignore it and sink the country altogether. Number three, that the Kenya Kwanza regime must take full responsibility for all the deaths, injuries and destruction of property arising from the violent suppression of peaceful protests. The president must publicly direct his security organs to forthwith seize the ongoing abductions, an exercise that we believe is being undertaken with his full approval and the approval of the state. He must account for and order the release of all detainees abducted by these security agencies. Number four, that the Independent Police Oversight Authority must expedite investigations into all these incidents, including allegations of mass murder by police in Githurai and in Rongai. We were shocked to watch the president claim on live television that only one life was lost. It tells you how out of touch with reality he is. Number five, that in our view, what happened on the 25th of June 2024 amounted to a vote of no confidence in the Ruto regime. It is clear that this fact is totally lost on Ruto. It is reflected in his petulant proposals on how we manage our economy following the rejection of his tax bill. Instead of focusing on cutting wastage, opulence and corruption in his regime, he is hitting back at the Kenyan people with threats to cut funding for the judiciary and the county governments. Six, that the ODM party will support credible austerity measures in the executive and in parliament. These two institutions have been expressly indicted by the people as citadels of largesse and wastage, with fresh memory of the invasion of parliament and standing threats for occupation of the executive seat of power. These two institutions must have an honest introspection on their contribution to our current predicament and take measures to lessen the taxpayers' burden. As a party funded by taxpayers ourselves, we will also be taking steps to scale down on our presence across the country and some of our activities to reflect this new economic reality. Lastly, that ODM shall initiate and lead recall processes in the following constituencies in light of the current office holders' repeated violation of their sacred oath and the wishes of their electorate. Number one, Game constituency. Number two, Bondo constituency. Number three, Navaholo constituency. Number four, Kajiado Central. Number five, Ikolomani. And lastly, Suba South in Homa Bay. Thank you. That is the end of the statement. Eric. Jeff, yes, sorry. Kirui, can I first take questions that are related to the statement we've read? Brad, yeah. Please.
Now, you see that you support the demand by the youth. One among the demand is the definition of. Do you support that?
The youth have spoken in clear and certain terms. Let us not pretend like we don't hear what they are saying. You have heard it, we have heard it, Ruto has heard it. Next question.
The kind of environment that the president is in right now, do you think it supports calls for dialogue?
No, because nobody believes what the president is saying. His actions and words are totally different. And what we have called for in our statement, first of all, is he must publicly speak to his police, publicly, and tell them that he knows what they are doing and Kenyans have asked that he stop. So if he doesn't stop that, really, there is really nothing to discuss. Many of the people he is looking for to have a discussion with are actually in custody. Yes, Luke.
Like some 5 constituencies that you are going to initiate the report.
Six. Yes.
How did you arrive at 5?
Yes, the criteria was very simple. In our statement, we have said repeat offenders. Those who voted against the wishes of the people in 2023 and again did it in 2024 because there are few who met their Damascus moments this year. Yes, this is the criteria we have applied, Luke, and we want to be able to focus on these 6 as a lesson to all the others. Is there any other question? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Asanteni sana.
Kumbe ulikuwa umeshatoa kamera. Serious? Ulikuwa umeshatoa kamera?
Mimi nilitoa kamera. No, mimi nilitoa.
Hiyo weight yote inaenda na tripod. Mimi nimeshikilia tripod. Sasa nitakuvuta nitakuwa nayo.
ODM party leader Raila Odinga there with members of his party attending the party central committee meeting where ODM Secretary General Edwin Sifuna has spoken, and in a statement issued by the ODM party have decried the killings of young Kenyans who have fell victim to bullets aired by police officers in the wake of the protests. The ODM party saying over 30 young Kenyans have fell victim to the bullets and indiscriminate killings by police. The ODM party also saying that it is in awe of Kenyan youth and what they have achieved in standing in solidarity by raising money for their injured and also standing in solidarity with their fallen compatriots, those who died during the protest by raising money for their burials and also raising money for those who are injured and still in offices. They also proceeded to condemn the abuse of police power on innocent and armed protesters, saying that no one has to die while exercising the rights of the Constitution. The ODM party has also condemned abduction, saying upwards of 50 individuals have been abducted in the ongoing protests, and that it is clear that no one in government is ready to take responsibility. The ODM party also criticized the head of state for distancing himself from these abductions, saying that the government must never abdicate its responsibility to protect lives. The ODM party also saying in its statement that it stands with the people and that of the 115 members of the National Assembly who rejected the Finance Bill, 74 of those members were from the ODM party. And the meeting has resolved, this ODM special meeting has resolved that it is time for political leadership to begin to listen. And the ODM party continued to say that they consider this to be Kenya's last best chance, saying that if the country is able to seize this opportunity and implement the demands of the youth, then maybe then there is a chance to redeem the country from the chaos that we are currently seeing in different parts of the country. The ODM party also called on the Kenya Kwanza government to take full responsibility of deaths and destruction of property, and called on President William Ruto to instruct his security organs to cease abductions and to release all detainees, also calling on the Police Oversight Authority to investigate the mass killings in Githurai, and saying that what happened with Kenyans rejecting the finance bill is a vote of no confidence, reflecting in the fact that Kenyans have lost complete trust in the government of the day. The ODM party finishing its statement by saying that as a party funded by taxpayers, they will take steps to cut down on expenditure, and also called out office holders for repeat violations, mentioned Gem constituency, Bondo, Nabaholo, Suba, and others as well. That, of course, being a statement that was given by the party Secretary General Edwin Sifuna, and in attendance was ODM party leader Raila Odinga during the party central committee meeting that is currently underway. We're continuing to keep a look at the situation in different parts of the country as Gen Zs resumed their Tuesday demonstrations today. They are back on the streets protesting against the Finance Bill 2024. They are also continuing to express their unhappiness with President William Ruto's leadership on different social media platforms. We've been bringing you pictures from different parts of the city here in Nairobi and also in other parts of the country. As we continue to take a look at what is happening in parts of the country, I'm joined in studio by Ken Echesa. He is a political scholar as well as an advocate of the High Court. We're looking at a situation that is replaying itself. 3 weeks down, we're seeing a relentless group of protesters who, despite the president in his televised interview on Sunday extending an olive branch, saying he is open to dialogue, have continued to take to the streets. What distinguishes the style of these Gen Z protesters compared to previous generations of activists in Kenya? We're seeing them continuing to be relentless, even despite the president continually coming on TV and taking a different stance on issues, saying he is willing to listen. We still see them relentless as ever.
Thank you, Lillian. What we are witnessing in our country is unprecedented. In our history, we've never witnessed such demonstrations, not even in our worst moments in 2007-2008 during the post-election violence. It is even more unfortunate that the President of the Republic has addressed the nation 3 times, on 3 occasions, but the demonstrators are still on the streets. One thing, the demonstrations today are happening under a very different regime, under the new constitution, which offers a lot of protection to the demonstrators in terms of the Bill of Rights. Number 2, the demonstrators are using unprecedented methods in terms of mobilization, social media mobilization. But most importantly, that this is the first demonstration in our political history that is leaderless, is not directed by anyone. So there is no one to negotiate with, no one to talk to, and no one to convince to cede the ground. Mm-hmm. What the president should do, in my opinion, is to struggle and harness the national goodwill so that the nation is with him in convincing the Gen Z to stop the demonstration. Mm-hmm. But unless and until the president harnesses the national goodwill through action, we are going to continue witnessing these demonstrations, which are causing untold havoc to the economy of our country and to the social fabric of our nation. We've just listened to the Right Honorable Prime Minister's party, Raila Odinga's ODM, give a press conference, and we thought that it was going to be a press conference that is going to call for calm and what. But what we see is actually a rubber stamp to what is going on, and still calling on the president to react to what the Gen Z, the demands that he has been given.
Mm-hmm. And this has moved away from being a Gen Z movement, because what we are seeing now is the Gen Z themselves calling on all Kenyans of all walks of life, of all ages, to marshal their support behind this mass movement. In terms of, before we get to the ODM and their statement, in terms of how the Kenyan government has responded to these protests, protests. We know that the president has addressed the nation 3 times now. So in terms of the response to these protests and what impact this had on this mass movement, what is your analysis on Kenyans' response to the president, even now being open to dialogue this coming Thursday?
One, in the eyes of Kenyans, the president has been abandoned. He is seemingly the only one who seems concerned in government that there are demonstrations. The rest of government is not speaking. The minister in charge of security and interior has not spoken to the nation for the past more than 72 hours. And the president has been making serious attempts to speak to the nation, but the nation seems not to be listening. Why is the nation not listening? Perhaps the president is not speaking to the heart of where the problem is. There was a list that was circulating within social media of the demands that people are making. And these are not the demands by the Gen Z. It's the demands of the Republic coming through the Gen Z. Even the simplest of the demands, by now and by demonstration of goodwill, I think the government and the president ought to have acceded to 1 or 2 to demonstrate to Kenyans that we are indeed concerned about what this generation is raising. What the president requires does not even require the Thursday meeting, a forum. The president can issue an executive order that will address 70% of what this young generation has raised. The offices, the corruption issues, the regulation of government, reducing of the ministries is something that the president can do through an executive order. He doesn't have to wait for the meeting. And if the Kenyans have to listen, then we have to keep asking the government, what is the bare minimum you are doing before people go on to the negotiations? But without that, I think we're going to go into much storytelling. We have meetings that are being planned, but I think the government is also getting it wrong. If you go on space as the head of state and as a government, how many Kenyans are on Twitter? You are going to speak to a different group from the people on the streets. Will the president target the people now on the Wayekwe demonstrating on the CBD? Some of them have no phones. Those who have phones, perhaps they're not smartphones. Those with smartphones have no bundles. So what is your target audience?
Yeah, and talking about, target audience, I want us to go back to, the altering of the public discourse, around governance and accountability in Kenya. The X space being one of the ways that the president has said he is open to engaging with the people who are obviously, really making their opinions known and seen on these social media platforms. But in terms of you saying that this would leave out a significant chunk in terms of public discourse, we're talking about religious institutions, we're talking about, many other interested parties that might perhaps not find an opportunity to voice their opinions here. What would be the best way forward, now that you say that perhaps the X space might not be the best avenue to, find a way forward?
One, the president needs to start by demonstrating goodwill, the general goodwill, by doing the bare minimum. If there are issues of corruption in government, the president has the power to hire and fire. Let him do that. If there are things he can do without necessarily getting approval of institutions, let him do that. And secondly, he has to break the audience into some targeted groups. If you want to meet the youthful people, go to the social media. If you want to meet the churches, go to NCCK. If you want to meet the media, talk to the media. If you want to meet the religious community, the business community, go to different business communities. And he must release his government to deal with this issue. The government, the public is wide. He may not be able to address all the issues as the head of state. He must first bring his government together, and he must ensure that the whole of government approach is involved in solving this crisis. For instance, we have people who listened to him on Sunday, but how many people are able to watch the mainstream media that he was speaking to. This is the time to even go to the local media stations and speak to the people. This is the time to organize county-based forums and speak to the stakeholders. If he is alone and he can manage this, let him do it. If he has the government that he can delegate, let him do it. But there seems to be a breakdown in communication between the president, between the government, and the people who are being governed. And that is why, as he speaks, nobody seems to be listening. And that tells him he has to change the approach of engaging Kenyans.
Nobody seems to be listening, but do you believe that this wave of activism could lead to substantial changes in government policy? The things that people are basically talking about, governance, accountability, political dynamics. Do you think that we will see a shift by taking to the streets and by continuing to say what you're saying is not enough? We're still not hearing you. You're still not hearing us. With this very aggressive and continuing wave of activism, are we likely to see any substantial change?
Yes, and we're already witnessing the substantial change, because for the first time the president has refused to assent to a bill passed by parliament, not on his own accord, but by bowing to the pressure of the electorate. For the first time, we have seen members of parliament apologizing to the nation and their constituents for voting in a particular way that was not inconsistent with the people that they represent. We are going to see a wave of change in the way government policy is developed, is implemented. We are going to see a fundamental change in the way government deals with corruption. What this generation has demonstrated to government is, well, we can ask you to act. If you don't act, we can act as well. In terms of getting the people's power and people's voices to be heard, we have succeeded as a country through this generation. However, my fear is that if this goes unmitigated, we are going to cause havoc and untold mystery in terms of economic and the social fabric of the nation. People are dying, lives are being lost, property is being destroyed, and we do not seem to have an end game to all these. This is a movement that is leaderless. This is a movement that is tribeless. You can't go back to your tribe and say, I am under attack. Even at your own home turf, people are demonstrating. You can't go back to the leader and say, please let us talk. They have no leader. So it calls for some high levels of wisdom and approach to tackle this movement.
There have been concerns that as these protests continue, there's the risk, of course, of loss of lives. Let's talk about the role of police and security officers in managing these demonstrations. Of course, we've seen use of disproportionate force against the protesters. We've seen incidents involving the firing of live ammunition, wielding of batons, deployment of tear gas, the purple rain, or is it the pink rain? You might call it purple or pink, depending on whether you're colorblind or not. But in terms of the role of security forces in managing these demonstrations, your assessment 3 weeks down the line in how they have handled this entire crisis, what would that be from where you're sitting as an observer?
As an observer, I think the security agencies have failed the nation. One, the primary role of the security agents is to protect the citizens, to protect life. And secondly, is to protect property. You cannot end people's lives in the name of protecting property. It is life first, then property second. And we have seen police use excessive power, use live bullets, use tear gas guns, throwing them at demonstrators, and in the end, killing them. And this perhaps is where the government is getting it wrong in terms of approaching and dealing with the demonstrators. We are using the 18th century approach to the 21st century demonstrators. Previously, people would carry stones, people would mobilize by political heads. Today, these young people are mobilizing themselves through social media. They are releasing placards and leaflets on social media, telling them tomorrow we're occupying parliament, we're occupying CBD, and so forth. But the police are still deploying the same mechanism they used 2-3 years ago to quell demonstrators demonstrating today. Previously, they have been targeting the leaders. Today, they have no leader to get to target. And therefore, the first approach is let us educate the police on the best approach to dealing with the 21st century demonstrations, especially the Gen Z demonstrations. 2, 3, 4 days ago, a judge sitting in Malindi issued an order restraining the police officers from using tear gas, live bullets, and rubber bullets. What we are witnessing on our screens are the policemen using tear gas and doing everything that the judgment spoke against. And when the president spoke to the nation, he committed to rule or to stand with the rule of law. He kept speaking to the rule of law. And one of the demands by the Gen Z generation is adhere to the rule of law. If you cannot respect a simple court order telling you do not use rubber bullets, do not use live bullets, do not use tear gas, and in the open media space, we are seeing them using tear gas and so forth and so on. But where is the goodwill?
But Ken, we did see there from pictures in Kangemi, while these protests started off as being largely peaceful, they seem to have taken a life of their own. And we must admit and accept that there are people who take advantage of such protests, criminals, petty, looters and robbers and what have you. So while the police, might argue on their own that they're ready to escort and provide security to the protesters, we have seen elements of persons that have taken advantage of these protests and actually thrown, stones and hurled stones at the security organs that are on the ground. In such a situation, how then would the police be expected to
that is quite sad. It's quite sad. And the demonstrators, people on the streets should know that they are protected by law. But they lose that protection immediately they turn violent or they arm themselves. The police is allowed to use reasonable force when he is endangered, when his life is in danger. And by throwing stones, you actually send a message that we are trying to endanger your life. If we get to you, we can do something else. However, this should be isolated cases. I do not believe that all demonstrators throughout the country are throwing stone and are using force. In the CBD, during the morning hours, people were very peaceful. Even those who had not come to CBD with the intention to demonstrate. But we saw police dispersing them. And therefore, the police can also be very provocative to the demonstrators, just like the demonstrators can be very provocative to the police. We call upon both groups, the police officers and the demonstrators, to exercise restraint and do whatever they are doing within the confines of the law.
Yeah. And, we also know that hundreds of demonstrators, perhaps not hundreds, but even from this ODM statement right now, according to the numbers that they're giving, is that apart from over 30 young Kenyans losing their lives, there are many more, upwards of 50 persons that have been reported missing or that have been abducted. So, without knowing, where they have gotten these numbers from or where they lay claim to these numbers, we do know that there are, in fact, people who have reported their loved ones missing. They could either have been arrested or, they might have lost their lives and are still unaccounted for. So in terms of these illegal arrests or detention, and of course, we're also talking about persons that have sustained injuries. Let's first of all begin with the illegal arrests or detentions under the law. If at all you are picketing and find yourself behind bars, the recourse in terms of being the booking, first of all, the OB, and then again, how long should you be detained for before you're produced before court? Because the concern is that a lot of these people have not even been legal, have not been booked in most of these police stations, and therefore nobody knows where they are.
That is an illegality, and in fact, the right to the writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a legal Latin term to mean produce the body whenever you're asked to produce. That is a right that is not limited by law. And once the police arrest you, they must do the honorable thing of identifying themselves, informing you that they are police officers on duty, informing you of the reason of arrest, and upon arrival at the police station, they need to book you and give you an OB number. This OB number must be brought to closure and you are released, and if you are not released within 24 hours, you must be produced before a court of competent jurisdiction. Even if they have not established a case against you, they are allowed by law to produce you before court and ask the court for an extension of time to continue holding you so that they can prepare the case against you. In this case, we've seen people who were abducted from their houses, from the streets. They have neither been booked in the occurrence book at the police stations, nor have they been produced before courts. And we saw the Chief Justice directing courts to sit even at odd hours to determine the applications for habeas corpus, which means the applications arising out of the abductions. And for the first time, we saw a court in Naivasha sit on a Sunday to address or to review the issue of the bond bail application that had been denied by the lower court. It's therefore illegal and unconstitutional to hold on to someone beyond 24 hours unless at the lapse of the 24 hours it is either on a weekend or a public holiday when the court is not sitting.
And of course we had the ODM party in its statement talking about the police oversight authority calling on them to investigate the quote-unquote mass killings, what was observed in Githurai, which of course the president, not the president, but the government in itself continues to remain mum about, because we have not yet had a clear word on what exactly happened there. So in terms of the oversight authority investigating these mass killings, the extrajudicial killings, why as of now have we not had any word at all communicating to Kenyans what exactly is going on? There's a sense that people are losing their lives. There's a sense that people are being abducted illegally. There's a sense that there are police officers who are arresting persons without identifying themselves.
And with profound respect, my practice as an advocate tells me that the only thing that is independent about independent policing oversight authority is the word independent. IPOA runs like a government agency, and it is difficult to ask a government agency to investigate another government agency and expect results. This is not the first case where the IPOA has failed to act in good time. There are various complaints about the police excesses across the country over the past 10 years, and the IPOA has done nothing. And then most importantly is that IPOA runs like a toothless dog that can bark but cannot bite. IPOA does not have the prosecutorial powers. It does not have the powers beyond the report they make. And once they have made the report to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, they become functus official. They cannot do anything.
Functus official in English terms, wakili.
Their term ends there.
Their term ends there. Functus official.
Functus official. Yes. And therefore, them you take them to a report that this police officer has acted beyond their powers. They'll make that report, they'll do the investigations, they then make the report to the Directorate of Public Prosecutions to act. Another report is taken to the National Police Service Commission to act. So IPOA is a conveyor belt. To also condemn them is to be unfair. Then they cannot give you what they have done. They don't tell you what they have done, because legally they can do nothing. They pass the files either to the ODPP for trial or the National Police Service Commission for disciplinary measures. They cannot discipline a police officer. They cannot arrest a police officer. They cannot prosecute. They are a conveyor belt.
But then again, just going back to that statement by the ODM party there in the Central Committee meeting, where they're calling on the president to instruct his security organs to seize abductions and to release all detainees. Does the president have the power to do this?
The president has the power because the president is the chairperson of the National Security Council. And any death occurring anywhere in this country, we blame the president, because as the chair of the National Security Council, he ought to know and to give general direction. The president has a ministry called the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government, the one headed by Professor Kindiki Kinduri. This is the ministry under which the police officers fall. This is the ministry that supervises the police force. And therefore, if the president cannot supervise the minister who supervises the police force, he is right to be blamed. He has actually the absolute power to tell the police through the line minister to stop doing what they're doing if they're doing anything illegal.
And just talking about the extrajudicial killings, Ken, are there lessons that Kenya can learn from other nations in, first of all, preventing? And if in the unfortunate event that these extrajudicial killings actually do happen, in addressing extrajudicial killings, where can we borrow from where there have been extreme cases and how, those particular democracies or jurisdictions have learned from such scenarios?
I think Kenya cannot borrow from its peers in Africa, because what we are witnessing in Kenya is worse in other African states that I may not want to mention, but from the Western countries, we've seen demonstrations in the United Kingdom. We've seen demonstrations in the United States of America, where government deals with demonstrators while exercising restraint. They do not use excessive force. And whenever life is lost, the president himself accounts for each life that is lost. However, we must also say that the demonstrators in those countries, in those civilized countries, also demonstrate with restraint, demonstrate within the legal framework of their countries, making it easy and simple for the police officers to also exercise their power within the confines of the law. As we ask our country to borrow from progressive jurisdictions on how to end extrajudicial killings, we must also nurture a culture of demonstration that is devoid of violence, that is devoid of looting. However, in South Africa, this has critically improved. From an African perspective, South Africa offers us constructive lessons. It offers us constructive lessons because the government has been more friendly, even to the demonstrators previously, to the opposition, and there has been constructive engagement between the non-state actors and the state actors. However, excessive use of force in Kenya is just like it happens in other countries we don't want to mention, but it is a bad exercise, is a bad reputation. It spoils our image at home and our image abroad.
And, just going back to a lot that was said during, Sunday's televised interview, the Kenyan public has continually observed discrepancies between what has been communicated and what has been done. Now, how can the current government of the day, in view of the fact that, there's a lot of trust issues that are obviously going on, build trust with its citizens, particularly the youth who seem to be the most aggrieved and antagonized in the wake of these events?
You see, I go back to what I said, that the president is a lone ranger in the struggle to bring back normalcy. Why do I say so? Having watched the head of state on Sunday, what came out is that either the head of state was ill-prepared for the interview or he was misled by his government to give some of the statements that he gave. First, we kept arguing whether 19 people died or 24 people died. Even if only one person died, that was gross violation of that person's rights, and it ought to have been a matter of concern to the Republic. Whether it is 1 life or 100 lives is a matter of concern. Number two, the president kept on saying that since we've rejected the finance bill, which sought to raise 347 billion, we are going to have austerity measures and we must brace ourselves as a country for tougher times. But then he quickly adds that he's going to borrow 1 trillion. If Kenyans have rejected 464 billion, why should you then borrow 1 billion? Yet, one of the things that have sent this generation to the streets is the debt issue, that we are over borrowing. Why are you then telling them that we are going to borrow more? If we were to borrow 467, we're not going to borrow 1 trillion. It comes out that either the president's advisors have failed him or the president was ill-prepared for that particular interview, which is adding insult to an injury, is not solving the matter. He has spoken to the nation 3 times. The first time, the second time, and the third time, and the people are still on the streets. That means that the 4th time, he must have a well-prepared script that will speak to the people's hearts and calm them.
But aside from the people and what they want, and even if the president's concession manages to see off the immediate threat of more unrest, and perhaps, hopefully with Thursday's dialogue, if at all we see the protesters backtracking and, somehow holding at bay because of what will be the outcome of these conversations, it still leaves the president caught between the competing demands of, his hard-pressed citizens and of lenders such as the IMF. The situation still remains that, and he maintains that we have huge debt concerns as a country.
But this is not the first time we are having the huge debt as a country. The debt issue has been there from Moi's time, Kibaki's time, Uhuru's time, and even today. What makes a difference is the arrangement that a government takes in paying this particular debt. You cannot pay a 60-year-old debt in 5 years. And perhaps this is what is giving us more trouble. And we cannot be borrowing to pay or overtaxing to pay. Remember, the generation that you want to use their taxes to pay this debt, it is their forefathers who actually took this debt. And these young children are asking, if these people have been borrowing for 60 years, why do they want to burden us by paying perhaps in 5, 2, or 3 years? Mm-hmm. So the issue of debt is an issue that requires technical approach. And this young generation are people who Google. They know what the IMF does. They know what the World Bank does. They know the perception of these Bretton Woods institutions on the economies of developing countries. Mm-hmm. You will get them lecturing you on why IMF has taken over your budgetary process, and they will see them demonstrating to you that indeed this budget mm-hmm. is not a Kenyan budget. This budget was drafted elsewhere and is being forced down the throats of Kenyans. Yeah. It is a generation that can do research, is an informed generation. Mm-hmm. So the budgeting process that was there in the 1990s cannot be the same budgeting process that will be there in the 2020s, because we are dealing with different generations.
We're dealing with different generations, and hot on the heels of this conversation is something in the dailies today, around lawmakers being in line for a hefty salary increment starting this month, even as Kenyans demand that the government effects budget cuts and other austerity measures. We're seeing here a Gazette notice by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission stating that the monthly remuneration structures for state officers in the Senate and the National Assembly are to be implemented in the financial year 2024-2025 effective July 1st. So this essentially means that the two speakers of the National Assembly, the Senate, Moses Wetangula and Amason Kingi respectively, will starting this month, get salary increments. The timing.
And then we ask, who advises government? Who advises commissions? Even if these increments are deserved, is it the right time to publish them? Is it the right time when the president is talking about the austerity measures? And that is why Kenyans say they have trust issues. You cannot be saying on the one hand that we are going to cut down our civil service. Mm-hmm. We are going to have a decrease in our salaries. And on the other side, you are increasing the salaries for your officers in the parliament, that is in the Senate and in the National Assembly. Mm-hmm. Well, people will argue that SRC is an independent commission. But before SRC undertakes what it has done, there must be negotiations with the National Treasury, because this money will be paid by the National Treasury. National Treasury is at the center of government. Why will National Treasury approve such an increment at such a time when we are having a national crisis around our budget? Mm-hmm. Is a bad idea. Yeah. And today you cannot do anything in hiding, because every document you release, every action you take as a government, it is released to the public. And Kenyans have a right under our constitution to access information, whether it is held by government or any other agency.
Mm-hmm. And there's a huge concern about civic education and about these draft changes not being subjected to public participation. A lot of people do not know where this public participation happens, if at all.
There is a public participation, but which is limited in nature. For instance, when Parliament is carrying out public participation on bills, they send the bills, the advert through the newspaper. How many Kenyans read the newspaper? And they have a selective way of doing public participation. And even the finance bill that was rejected, it was purportedly taken through public participation, but public participation that was driven in a manner that will give approval. But where even the media took the trouble of engaging the public on the bill, we saw the Committee of Parliament ignoring the sentiments of various stakeholders until they held a meeting at State House where the President could concede on some. Yeah. People have always mistaken public participation to be the idea of taking the bill to the people and telling the people, this is what we are doing. Your response to this is immaterial. We are going to do it. They do not know that the silent implication of public participation is actually public concurrence to a larger extent. If we had a listening parliament, if we had a listening committee and a listening leadership at Parliament at the committee level, we will not have reached where we are now as a country. Because everything that Kenyans said was not reflected in the draft bill, leading Kenyans to go into the streets and the president eating a humble pie as the last option, which has not solved the matter.
Yeah. Now, talking about Kenyans going to the streets, there is concern that there's been infiltration of criminal elements in these protests. And what we're seeing in terms of the protests is the protests taking a different life and infiltration of elements that might not be actually for the actual cause. The president himself had warned that police will be there to deal with quote-unquote criminals who would want to infiltrate these protests, and therefore the concern is that it is not known whether the persons that are protesting today in different parts of the country are actually there for the right cause or the cause that they stand for.
It is a normal occurrence in any contemporary society because, Lillian, we've seen in Parliament during very sober debates where members disagree, we've seen fist fights. It also means that even within a setting of Parliament, you cannot miss to have criminal elements that take advantage of a debate to engage in fistfights. Even in churches, during the elections of some bishops in Pentecostal churches, we have seen congregants physically fight to get these particular positions. We do not expect sainthood on the streets. It is indeed true that criminals have infiltrated the demonstrations and are taking over.
Yeah.
However, it is the duty of the police and the police force to isolate criminals from genuine protesters. Take the criminals to the police stations and let the genuine protesters continue with their protests.
And we're going to be crossing over to see what is happening in different parts of the country, even as security elements continue to keep protesters at bay. And that is what is happening in different parts of the country. We've been bringing you live pictures, this being the third week of the protests. The day started with relative calm here in Nairobi Central Business District. This as the hashtag Occupy CBD Tuesday continued to trend on the X platform. Contingency of security officers stationed in different parts of the country, and here in Nairobi County at the CBD and in roads leading to State House Nairobi. This has forced motorists to use alternative routes. Remember, these protests were sparked off by the passage of the Finance Bill 2024, which of course the National Assembly passed this very past month in June. However, President William Ruto did bow to increasing pressure following the protests and withdrew the bill. Now, what initially started off as the Gen Z making their demands known and calling for the government of the day to listen to their concerns has now morphed into the marshalling of support from all Kenyans to show up in solidarity with their cause. And the unrest continues, after initially being sparked off by the finance bill, but Kenyans continue to express their frustration, which they say have been simmering for years in a country where economic growth has failed to keep up with the country's growing population, and of course a generation that remains unemployed, that has gone to university, that has acquired degrees, but is still struggling in this day and age to find employment in this country. The government of the day arguing that it is at high risk of debt distress. This, of course, according to the International Monetary Fund, and more than a third of its revenues going towards debt interest payments. The scrapped finance bill sought to raise 347 billion, which is 2.7 billion, pretty much, in taxes to reduce the debt burden. That is $2.7 billion in taxes to reduce the debt burden. It proposed levies on basic items such as bread, sugar, tax increases on things such as diapers, sanitary towels, mobile money transfers, and a tax on cars. Now, President William Ruto has since withdrawn the bill, but despite his calls, after having addressing the nation 3 times, the persons that continue to take to the streets have been relentless, saying that they have not been heard. During a media roundtable at State House Sunday night, President William Ruto agreed to demands that the only environment the protesters would be comfortable discussing their issues was space on X. However, this has attracted mixed reactions. There are those that are not for it, continuing to say that there are major trust issues. The Kenyan public has continually observed discrepancies between what has been communicated by President William Ruto's government and what has in fact been done. And therefore the question continues to remain how the Kenyan government, the current government of the day, can build its trust with its citizens, particularly the youth, in the wake of these events. We're yet to see what the potential outcomes will be between the dialogue that will take place between the government and the youth, and whether that will lead to significant policy changes. The youth, the Gen Zs, the millennials, the Generation X, they have all raised concerns about the opulence that has been observed with the current leadership, from MPs to cabinet secretaries to nominated senators, nominated MPs, talking about opulence, talking about corruption, and talking about a huge display of wealth from the leadership of the day, while they continue to struggle with huge, debt, a huge price of living in the country, and saying that it does not make sense for things to continue as they have been. The ODM party earlier did give a statement as they held their party central committee meeting, and they spoke into the killings of Kenyans who have died, saying that over 30 Kenyans have fallen to police bullets. They also spoke about being in awe of what the Kenyan youth have been able to orchestrate in terms of their movement, their mass movement, taking to the streets, saying that they are in awe of that, and that they have a lot of respect for the current youth of the day in terms of them coming together, marshalling support for their own, raising money for those that have been injured, those that lay in hospital after sustaining bullet wounds, those that have lost their lives, raising money for the burials of those. They also condemned abuse of police power, saying that police have shown the abuse of their power by harming unarmed, innocent protesters, saying that nobody has to die while exercising their rights as citizens of this country. They also condemned abductions, saying that upwards of 50 individuals have been abducted and remain unaccounted for. And they also spoke about the fact that it is clear that no one in government is ready to take responsibility. The head of state himself has distanced himself from these abductions, and that it is the government's duty to protect its citizens citizens and that it must never abdicate its responsibility to protect its lives. Wakili, there is a general sense that and even from the Gen Zs, that nobody in government is ready to take responsibility. You yourself here speak saying that we have not had from the very head of security himself in the country speaking out on what is currently happening, the state of the nation in terms of security concerns, and that has replayed itself on social media as well, that nobody is listening.
Nobody's listening, and we will blame the chief executive. You know, the government belongs to the chief executive, who is the president. Some of these people who are not willing to take responsibility are appointees of the chief executive, and the chief executive can make a decision at any given time. If I were a president today in this country, I will make serious decisions that will bring about normalcy. This is not the time to look at the friendship you have with your government officers. This is the time to look at the interests of the nation. Mm-hmm. This is the time to act in the best interest of your country. And surely, if people have died, we have not seen the Minister for Security coming out to even condemn the killings. We have not seen the Minister of Defense. The best that the Minister of Defense could do is to issue a gazette notice deploying KDF onto the streets. And when the court made a ruling, he further issued an amorphous and ambiguous gazette notice that could not even tell the timelines. Mm-hmm. This tells you that they are willing to have this situation for as long as it takes. It is turning out to be, what can we do to retain power and to remain in power, and not what can we do to bring about normalcy so that the citizens lead the lives that they have been leading before. At times you sympathize with the president when he is addressing the country. Mm-hmm. The loneliness, the anger, the frustrations all over his face, when he has junior officers junior to him, senior government officers but who are junior to the presidency, who can issue and give general directions. For God's sake, how would a president fail to know that a 12-year-old who was who was shot 8 times was not dead?
Mm-hmm. Away from this, let's talk about one of the 14 demands raised by the Gen Z protesters. Last week during a televised interview, the president announced that he would appoint new electoral commissioners for the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. How realistic would this be? The timelines, and looking at him saying that this is of utmost concern and it is a priority issue for him.
It's actually a priority issue for him and to Kenyans, but we have other priority issues. We have other pressing issues. But even if he made it a priority issue for him, it is not possible to appoint IEBC within the shortest time possible. Remember, it is a process. It is a consultative process. It is a process that is all including. He attempted to start this without involving other pertinent players, and it was brought to a stop by the players. And today, in this very progressive constitution, you attempt to appoint IEBC without adhering to the laid down procedures, the courts will stop you, because IEBC is at the heart of our electoral process, and we either lose an electoral process by bungling the appointment of IEBC, or we win an electoral process by ensuring that we do the right thing when we are appointing the IEBC. Mm-hmm. Whereas it appears like is an urgent matter, it may put us in a further awkward position, especially if the political elites fail to agree. Remember, the ongoing demonstrations have nothing to do with the IEBC. But once you begin this process and you bungle it midway, and the political players join into the demonstrations as a way of solving that particular issue, it gives us more headache. It puts us in a very precarious situation as a country. Yeah. Whereas I agree with the president that we need to have a functional IEBC, he must address himself to the procedures that must be undertaken, and they must be genuine procedures. Mm-hmm. If there is public participation, let it be public participation. If we are involving parliament, let us involve parliament. If we are involving other political players, let us involve them. Otherwise, if we bungle the appointment of IEBC today, we are looking forward to a bigger problem.
You know, this has been a key issue in the ongoing nationwide protests, marked, of course, by the significant youth involvement, the issue of rogue members of parliament and the need to hold fresh elections. The issue of the rogue member of parliament has also been cited here by the ODM in its statement, who, called out office holders, who they believe have been engaged in repeat violations. They mentioned different constituencies there. So, the thing is, people have been watching, people have been observing, and when you see a clarion call from the youth, then you realize that they're actually watching and that they've been observing the excesses and the opulence and the corruption therein, calling out the huge donations in fundraisings, questioning where this money comes from and why it's not going into the right purposes.
And that is why I'm saying that it's going to be a bit difficult in constituting the IEBC. The parliament that apparently Kenyans have no faith in has a role it plays. It must interview and vet the commissioners who have been nominated. The president, with whom Kenyans appear to have trust issues, needs to constitute a panel that will interview the commissioners. So the president will have to deal first with the teething problems before addressing the serious problem of the selection and appointment of IEBC. First, he must deal with these trust issues. He must convince Kenyans that he is capable of saying and sustaining a truth over a period of time. He must convince Parliament, Kenyans, that he has released Parliament, because that is, as it appears, Parliament is now captive of the executive, and Parliament is an extension of the executive, is not independent. That means that names going to Parliament, if the president has said these names have to be approved, they will be approved. If the president says they will not be approved, they will not be approved. He has to demonstrate to Kenyans that henceforth he is going to release Parliament so that Parliament can make objective deliberations, so that Parliament can make independent decisions, and if they mess with those decisions, let them face the consequences as Parliament and not as Parliament tied with the executive. Now the president cannot even negotiate for Parliament because Kenyans believe that he has captured Parliament, and that is why he had to do the amendments to the finance bill at State House and not at Parliament. And number three, having solved the issue of Parliament being independent, he has to come back to his leadership of the party, the coalition is leading in government, and tell them, from now going forward, let us act in the best interest of the people.
But the opulence is not specifically a Kenya Kwanza issue. When Kenyans talk about the need for these persons to cut down on expenditure and the huge shows of might in terms of opulence, it is not necessarily a Kenya Kwanza independent issue. Parliament in itself, when you look at members of the National Assembly across the sector, these displays, and even ODM itself in its statement has talked about people in its own party, persons that are affiliated to the ODM party itself, Azimio, actually being violators in terms of these extremities that the protesters are talking about when we talk about the country's leadership.
It is true, and this is even demonstrated in county governments, where government has representation and where the Azimio opposition has representation. Opulence is personal to the members displaying such opulence. But why Kenyans are critical of the Kenya Kwanza members of parliament and government officials who are demonstrating opulence is that, like Caesar's wife, their character is supposed to be above board. When a member from the opposition is demonstrating opulence, people can say that is his own personal hustle. But when a government official or a Kenya Kwanza member of parliament is displaying untold opulence, it simply means that there is some public funds that are missing elsewhere, because these are the persons in charge of the public funds. However, I agree with Kenyans that the question of opulence cuts across. The question of mismanagement cuts across. And Kenyans have been very keen on focusing on those areas where there have been misuse of funds. On the fateful Tuesday, where there was an attempt to burn down parliament, we saw an attack on on quite a number of county governments, not necessarily within Kenya Kwanza administration, even those that are from the opposition. And Kenyans are demonstrating this anger. You've seen governors going into functions, and what arrives first is a car carrying a governor's chair with about 5 people guarding a chair where the governor will sit on. What purpose does it serve? And this is what Kenyans are saying. We are fed up. And I am happy that from Tuesday, even the governors who've been moving around with chairs, even the member of parliament who've been moving around with bags full of money have stopped doing it. It took loss of lives to stop doing this. How many lives shall we lose to then gain sanity as a country?
Now, so where do we go from here? If withdrawal of the finance bill will not end, the anger, the discomfort, the unrest that we're seeing, where do we go from here? We've talked about this quote-unquote misbehavior cutting across board. The president of the day is in a position where he might not be able to tame the extremities that we've seen. Now that everybody is speaking in their own tune, we've seen the ODM in itself supporting the current protests that are ongoing. In terms of transformation and the reality of the fact that economic transformation would take time, where do we go from here? What do you think is the way out of the crisis that Kenya is currently facing?
The way out of the crisis is for the president to demonstrate goodwill. And how do you demonstrate goodwill? Is by doing the bare minimum. Even as we go to the X-Space with the president on Thursday, a number of young people are still in police custody. They have not been produced before courts. They have not been processed. Where is that particular goodwill? Release them. Tell them we're not releasing you to go and negotiate. You want to negotiate with people who are in prison, people who are in police custodies. And number 2, Lillian, there are some bare minimums that the president can do to demonstrate goodwill. The issue of sacking of corrupt cabinet secretaries or those who have been named in major scandals, do you require a meeting on space or on X-Space for you to fire them? You don't. Those are the decisions that you take. The issue of completion of government projects. And McHugh, these demonstrations have gained momentum even in the villages because people have realized all of a sudden that they have voice. They have a voice. And then when they voice their issues collectively and through demonstrations, people or government seems to hear them. We have, for instance, roads that are impassable. We've had mothers who have been forced to deliver on their ways to hospital. We've had patients who have lost their lives on their way to the nearest dispensaries because those roads are impassable. Yet, these roads have been budgeted for every financial cycle for the past 10 years. Why should we convert money meant for development into people's pockets so that opulence can be demonstrated? When you go to our dispensaries, we have no medicine across the country. When you go to our hospitals, we do not have specialists to attend to the patients. Yet we are told that we are taxed every year to ensure we have money for medicine, to ensure we have competent specialists in our hospitals. So we must change as a government the way we do things. This is not just about the national government, it also speaks to the county governments. We must change for the better, and if we do not change, then change is going to change governments.
Right, and hold on to that thought as we cross over now to what is happening in the Nairobi CBD. We are seeing what looks like an ambulance there, and of course we've also seen pictures from the Kenyatta National Hospital as persons that have been injured continue to be brought into the hospital. Remember, the protests continued today as persons took to the streets in various parts of the country. The unrest by the Kenyan youth, as well as all who have taken to the streets to protest over the finance bill, which has since been rejected by the president, continue to take to the streets. The concern now moving to criminal elements that the police say have infiltrated the protests and taken advantage of the protests, which largely started off as peaceful. It is not known how extensive these criminal elements are or what amount of looting that they have been engaged in, but police have raised concern that there has been infiltration of criminal elements in the ongoing protests that are happening in different parts of the country. The pictures on your screen are coming to you from Kenyatta National Hospital as well as the Nairobi CBD, where businesses remain closed for the better part of the day as security agents took to the streets to keep protesters at bay, and that is what is currently happening. We've seen lobbing of tear gas canisters in parts of Waiyaki Way. This has here in Nairobi County, that is, and this has affected the movement of transport along that particular highway. Of course, traffic continues to be largely easy in different parts of Nairobi as police have cordoned off major roads, those leading to State House Nairobi, and feeder roads as well, those leading to the Central Business District, as well as major highway. Earlier, we also brought you scenes from Mombasa County as well as Machakos County, where protests are ongoing there as well. There have been concerns over the use of disproportionate force against the protesters, the use of live ammunition, the wielding of batons as well, and of course the lobbing of tear gas. This, of course, being a major point or cause of concern to different human rights activists as well as the population as well, who say that the protest started off as largely peaceful, but the police have displayed many times excessive use of force. Let's take a look at what's happening there in the Nairobi CBD. Again, a lot of arrests continue to happen as police engage the protesters in running battles as well as make arrests of those that are seen to be engaging in criminal elements. Let's take a look, let's listen in. Those are the scenes that we're getting from Nairobi CBD. Today being yet another day when people have made their way to the streets. Initially, of course, we say that the day did start off largely peacefully as sections took to the streets to protest the current state of the nation. And this has since, of course, escalated into scenes where we've seen police make several arrests, where we've seen businesses within the Nairobi Central Business District and other parts of the country, Machakos County, Mombasa County, and elsewhere remain closed for the better part of the day. People have largely remained away from, or rather stayed away from, the Central Business District. As you can see from the pictures there, it is very quiet as of now, apart from pockets of protesters that we have seen engage police there, the police trying to keep them at bay. The most of what we have seen in terms of a highway that has been affected by the ongoing protests is Waiyaki Way in Nairobi, where protesters took to the streets. Waiyaki Way being a central point, really, and a central highway that is a feeder road to different parts from the Westlands area to the Nairobi CBD, to the James Gishuru Lavington area, as well as to the Kangemi area, Kikuyu, as well as to Naivasha, Nakuru, and Kisumu, and therefore this really being a very central point in terms of traffic being affected, that coming in and going out. That is the Waiyaki Way. We are still keeping our eyes on the situation there and on what the demands continue to be in terms of the current state of affairs and what people are expressing on the X platform, as well as social media by large, in terms of what they're saying around the controversial 2024 finance bill, which was since withdrawn, and what now came as the aftermath of that, which is simmering frustration of population that has decried the high cost of living in the country, that has decried the unemployment levels, and indeed that continues to be dissatisfied with the current government of the way. Several casualties also having been taken to the Kenyatta National Hospital. Those that have been injured in the protests, we do not know the extent of their injuries, but we will be bringing you more details on that in subsequent bulletins as we take a look at what exactly happened on the streets of Nairobi, Kisumu, Eldoret, Mombasa, and other parts of the country, Machakos, as well as the protests continue. We are continuing with our live coverage of the protests in several parts of the country. Police have arrested several protesters right here in Nairobi, as well as other parts of the country, and the unrest continues, albeit the fact that the president did speak to the nation in what looked like his extension of an olive branch. There seemed to be an environment of discontent, largely seeing what is trending on social media, as well as what is making news from various parts of the country: Nairobi, Kisii, Kisumu, Migori, Machakos, Mombasa, scenes that are truly an indicator that the state of unrest continues in the country. And the question now remains, where do we go from here, even as we wait for that much anticipated dialogue between the president and those that will be on that SpaceX on Thursday? We are yet to see what is going to come out of that. Now, in terms of Wakili, in terms of the state of unrest, and just going back to the Gen Zs and what they started, these are people that were born between 1997 and the year 2012, and they really seem to have borne the brunt of the country's slow economic growth. These are perhaps demographic that has experienced the post-election violence. They have experienced COVID as well, and all this, of course, coming in the wake of them saying that a chunk of them are graduates that perhaps have even graduated with honors. Not everybody has an entrepreneurial spirit. They still find themselves unemployed years after graduating from school. But aside from that, even as you look at the people that initially took to the streets, the fact that they even found time to be on the streets, the fact that if they are employed, they took time away from their offices to be on the streets, what does that speak about the culture that we're seeing in the youth of the day and their dissatisfaction with the government of the day? And of course, the build-up to that.
We must appreciate the fact that the people on the streets today were born under very extraordinary circumstances and have been raised in extraordinary circumstances. Most of them were actually very young when we had the post-election violence, or they witnessed firsthand the trouble of post-election violence. When these fellas were to join Form 1, they were hit by COVID. And even after Form 4, we still see the challenges that they are going through. They have been brought up through resilience. And the reason why they get time to be on the streets every Tuesday and every Thursday is that they have nothing constructive in terms of economic engagement to do. Some of them have finished their universities, they have very serious degrees, they are well-reasoned people, and that's why they're giving the police trouble to contain them during these demonstrations. They are ahead of time.
Yeah.
You tell them this, they knew it last week. You cannot tell them that I'm going to do this. You tell them that you're going to borrow 1 trillion. They are aware that the finance bill was only to raise a deficit of 467 billion or thereabout. They'll ask you, where are you taking the rest? This tells you that as generations grow, we are having more and more informed generations. And the way governments deal with these generations is quite different and difficult. These people on the street, they are meeting their colleagues who are picked as police officers on the fields when they missed out. They are meeting their colleagues with whom they have grown up with. They have gone through the same problems. It's even giving it a hard time for the police to attack the people they know, attack people they have gone to school with. It means that government progressively must have constructive engagement with the youth. The former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, is on record as having told Kenyans that unless we solve the problem of the youth, the young generation, we are going to pay the price for our failure of inaction. And therefore, this government and successive governments must plan for the young people and the generations to come. The problem of unemployment may not be wholly be blamed on the government of William Ruto. This is a problem that has been building over time, from early 2000 going forward. But what is making it worse today, that even for the little opportunities available for government to employ people, that employment is not based on merit. They based on other considerations, be they political considerations, ethnic considerations, is not based on merit. People, young people wonder why with their first class they are still in the houses when their brothers and sisters elsewhere who are well politically connected had their lowers, they're in high-level offices. Take, for instance, the employment of teachers. We also, as a nation, where politicians were now given letters and they give to those with whom they are politically connected. What communication are we sending to those young people who have no political connections? It means unless they take the power back to themselves, the political power back to their hands, nothing will work for them. We must have a functional government. We must have functional institutions that respects meritocracy, an institution that awards merit, an institution that does not celebrate mediocrity and punish merit. Young people will tell you today that it is a crime joining the university and graduating, because once you graduate, you don't have anything to do. And that is why they are on the streets. Since we have failed to engage them constructively, they are engaging themselves in a very unfortunate manner. You saw when the head of state was addressing the nation on Sunday and saying that the housing program has given us a number of opportunities for the young people. How many engineers are required on our one housing project? Just about 1 or 2.
Yeah, and the immediate reaction to this is that the informal sector, in as much as it has offered some opportunities, it offers low pay. There's literally no security, because once that project is done, then you have to move on to another one. And so really a very dissatisfied demographic that says it is just not enough.
And you're not going to tell graduates, people who spent 4 years to study at the university, that now I have a project, you can go there for Mujengo. I think that is not the kind of a generation that we are raising. So we must have a national discourse on how to engage the youth away from the informal engagements, away from the kazi kwa vijana. Kazi mtaani 10 years ago was something constructive to the young people. Kazi mtaani today does not make sense to this young generation. These are boys and girls who have gone to private schools, boys and girls who have never been caned, boys and girls who have never withered very strong sun and what. You now want to send them on a mjengo, they will not go. And to them, once you've graduated, then you are entitled to a white-collar job.
Now, following Sunday's interview, the elephant in the room, which is corruption, aside from the loss of lives, this was seen as a perennial problem which has become a major source of frustration for the Gen Zs. They feel that the country's leaders have failed to provide adequate opportunities for the educated youth. They failed to motivate the youth because it's really a one-man-for-himself culture here. Find yourself in leadership and take care of your own interests. And so that elephant in the room, which is in corruption, and the head of state's foot soldiers not looking like they are really playing their part in regards to being good foot soldiers, and that they are failing him, essentially.
And they have failed him. Why are there demonstrations even in the backyards where Kenya Kwanza thought to be very strong? It is because the electorate, the common man, is feeling the pinch. It is because people do not understand why their MP should be entertaining people on 5 million, 3 million bill paying when the same MP cannot educate children who are stuck in their mother's houses because they do not have fees to go to school. And in any country where politics is more profitable than their industries is a problematic country. In Kenya today, political office is more profitable than people going to industry. And that's why you see everyone wants to go into politics, because they know if you become an MP, you have a whole lot of CDF. If you become a governor, you have a whole lot of resources to control. And the people we've elected to offices have embarked on a journey to enrich themselves. And they will tell you, these people who are wallowing in opulence, they will tell you that they are fundraising for 2027. We had a one-time county secretary somewhere who, when confronted why they were looting, he was saying they were fundraising for 2027. You cannot be elected into a particular office and you embark on fundraising by way of looting public resources. Perhaps if we de-emphasize on political offices, the political leadership, if we were just to say that let members of parliament be elected to debate and pass laws and to do oversight, no CDF, we are going to make the positions very unattractive and we are going to get the right people holding the positions. If we make governors technocrats and depoliticize the positions, we are going to get right people. But we have elected into offices people who are in a rush to make wealth, people who are in a rush to make their lives comfortable at the expense of Kenyans. In this country, we are raising sufficient taxes and sufficient monies to fund our own project and to pay our own salaries. But because the monies that we raise as a country ends up in the pockets of few individuals, we appear like a poor country. Unfortunately, we even borrow to steal. That we have stolen what we've raised as a country, it is now done. We are now borrowing to be able to steal. When you go to courts today, we have very many people who have been charged with issues of corruption, especially in the anti-corruption cases.
That still hold office to date.
That still hold office to date. That still get re-elected to date. Why are we doing this as a country? We're actually messing ourselves and messing generations to come. Our forefathers perhaps messed a generation. They messed us. We are messing our generations. The generation we shall sire, the Gen Zs, the Alpha generations, and generations to come. We must, as a nation, have a culture of financial discipline, a culture of professionalism, a culture of integrity. We cannot be preaching. You saw what the president was saying, that the Minister for Agriculture went to Parliament and he was set free. And yet we have people, very junior officers at the Ministry of Agriculture, who are battling cases. because of the same mistakes for which the minister ought to have been fired. We're also growing in a generation where the person who loots the most is spared the consequences of the law. And the people who help him loot are the people who face the consequences. Perhaps we need to have a conversation around that issue.
And there's a general feeling that even as all these are brought to the public space, we're talking about illegal fertilizer, we're talking about counterfeit sugar finding its way into the country. There's a general sense that in as much as the media plays its role in making this information known to the public, that there is no conclusion, in terms of investigations and what they amount to, in terms of who takes responsibility, and in terms of who is actually held accountable for some of these mistakes.
It is because Kenya has become a man-eat-man society. Right from the police officer who arrests a suspect, he wants his share, to the investigating officer who will prepare a report. When that report is bungled, and by the way, investigations begin the very moment you become a suspect, investigations begin. And when the police investigating this matter or the EACC bungle the investigation and forward a bungled file to the ODPP, the DPP cannot secure a conviction in a court of law. We seem to focus on the court. Why has this person been acquitted? This judge has been compromised. This magistrate has been compromised. Not knowing that the magistrate was basically making a decision on the facts that were presented. We then turn our guns to the Director of Public Prosecutions and say, DPP, why have you lost this matter? Not knowing that DPP was basically a mortician. He received a file with a complete set of investigations and documents and presented it. If there was a conspiracy at the time of arrest and during the investigations, no amount of competence from the DPP will convince the judge or the magistrate to convict an accused person. So we are dealing with institutions that are spoiled. We are dealing with institutions that are not functional. We need to reform right from the bottom to the up for us to secure the country.
And I want to bring your attention to a statement on the current crisis facing Kenya. And this is, a joint statement signed by the Kenya Medical Association, the Bloggers Association of Kenya, the LSK, the Kenya Union of Journalists, the Medics for Kenya, and the Police Reforms Working Group, among others, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, Amnesty International Kenya. In terms of discourse and the announcement by State House of a multi-sectoral conversation to address policy issues raised by the Youth for Kenya Gen Z protest movement, this statement speaks on the urgent need for the state to arrest public theft and a bloated cabinet, invest in essential services, act on those who fired upon unarmed persons, release those arbitrarily arrested, and an end to extrajudicial killings, among other demands. But in this statement, it is collectively agreed that these demands do not require policy dialogue, but executive action. So basically, essentially what this statement is saying, Ken, is that decisive executive action and not a state-led national conversation will restore the faith of this generation. Please elaborate what an executive action would entail.
An executive action, when the president takes power, he releases a document called executive order. An executive order is a document that shows the structure and organization of government. That executive order has the number of ministries and each ministry given the departments. In that executive order, if it is reissued today, the president has power and authority to even merge the ministries. The Ministry of Finance, you remember when we had a handshake in 2007, we had Kibaki splitting the ministries, finance and economic planning. He had finance and he had economic planning. Even in the 22 ministries that we have today or thereabout, the president can collapse some of the related ministries into one. Ministry of Education, it can be Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, and Sports. so that sports is within the ministry. You've done away with one ministry. If you got the Ministry of Labor, you can put labor, culture, related issues. They go together. That one requires an executive order from the president. But even more worrying is the issue of departments. You know, departments were created within ministries to offer employment for the political appointees. Why in the Ministry of Education, for example, should we
An executive action would entail?
an executive action, you know, when the president takes power, he releases a document called